questions from parents saying, what should I use with footprints, or what is the best language program or the best maths program? We've decided that we're going to spend a month doing something that we don't normally do. Our focus is normally on encouraging moms to homeschool with confidence. But we're going to go through Shirley and Wendy's top picks for each different subject. So today we're going to start with language arts. Why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of what language arts incorporates, and then we can go phase by phase, primary, middle, and high school, and give our well tried out best ideas for parents.
Well, obviously it's language, and in this case we're going to talk about learning English, but what we say actually applies to another language if English isn't your first language. And ultimately we want our children to develop the skills of reading and writing, but also listening with understanding, and then being able to also speak and communicate well eventually. So, you know, I often say to my kids, whatever business you end up going into one day, you're going to be in the information business. You're going to have to tell people what you do, what you offer, about your services, about your products. So even children who think that they're not good at languages, they still need to have these skills. Yeah. And obviously to do well academically, it's an essential skill that we should build layer upon layer right from the preschool years. And I'll start there with some ideas that I think are important, and jump in and interrupt me like we normally do. But what I've learned is essential in the preschool years is to read aloud to your children so that they are hearing good language. Written language in the form of stories is a great model. It's a purer, more formal way of communicating than the daily language that we use. And the vocabulary is richer, so it builds that database of good language in our children's brains. And they need to have a good database coming in so that one day they can produce it going, and give it out. And then another
very insistent this morning.
Another great activity that's fun and easy to do in the preschool years is teaching your children nursery rhymes and songs and little poems and riddles and things like that, because it teaches them to listen, and rhyming words develop their auditory skills that are important for when they are older and start learning phonics. So they learn that fox sounds the same as blocks and socks and rocks, and even though they're not spelled differently, they can hear that the endings are the same. And that's why nursery rhymes are great, and they're also great fun, and the children like repetition, so it makes it really easy. You don't even need a curriculum, just a book.
Yeah, and the thing is, things like that, you can learn a lot by games with your kids, and it's games when you're driving in the car going to do your groceries or walking around the block. There's always a little poem or a little nursery rhyme that you can pull out of your own childhood memory and say with your children, and they actually become quite cute. So if a parent is saying, oh, but I'm nervous and uncertain, what can they purchase? What would be your top pick for a preschool level family?
I'd say definitely a book of nursery rhymes and songs. And I'd say probably the easiest option is to get a compilation of good stories. Perhaps something like a Beatrix Potter compilation, or another compilation of classic stories. I can't think of a title right now, but if you search on online bookstores, you should find that kind of thing.
Yeah, there's I remember there was a series of golden books that was great, and then A Child's Garden of Verses is also lovely.
Yes, Robert.
But then you also wrote It's Not Time to Be Bashful, I remember. So this is a curriculum section. So tell us a little bit about ABC Fun and 1, 2, 3.
So that was written when my third child was 2, and I had heard so many good ideas, and I wanted them all in one manual so that I'd remember to implement them. And so it's based on this idea of it sort of works on a letter of the alphabet per week, starting with the child's name, because that makes the most sense to the child, not rather than ABC. And then it gives reviews of children's stories that you can get from the library. And then it gives you nursery rhymes that tie in with that letter of the week. So if you're learning then you're going to do bar, black sheep, and read bear stories, for example. And then there are fun activities like cooking and crafts, and there's some letters to help children recognize letters before they're old enough to start reading, but just big, easy crafts and really just age-appropriate fun ideas. But the focus is that they're becoming aware that there are letters, and it also focuses a bit on counting so that they get an introduction to really basic mathematics.
Yeah, so more or less, what age would you advise parents to use ABC Fun?
It's aimed at children between the ages of 3 and 6 years.
Okay.
But before they're ready to start formal phonics, which most people start in grade 1. So it's the preschool years.
Yeah. And alongside that, if we look at the desire to expose our children to good storybooks, there's also little footprints that parents can consider, which is really for 4 to 8-year-olds. The other thing is that in the All About Reading range, we've got a pre-reading, so that would be after ABC Fun and 1, 2, 3, which is also lovely. And we'll put up some links and that sort of thing for parents to go and take a read. And yeah, I think that that's the foundation. We often overcomplicate it. We think that it's got to have loads of bells and whistles to actually work. But I think in this age, it's more about creating that environment where kids are eager to learn to read and to be consistent in it, right?
Absolutely. It's actually not that hard. There are only 44 sounds that they have to learn to read eventually when they start phonics. So, you know, you can really make it fun and games.
Cool.
So we talk about the primary grades next, and I'll let you jump in first.
Thank you. So for the way that we approached home education in both our homes was using literature-based programs, because we understood the value that comes from sitting on the couch reading with your children. But there is a whole nother side to it, besides the enjoying the memory of that now that the kids are a little bit bigger, is that it encourages our children to have a sense of wonder and want to learn themselves. If they can disappear into the pages of a story and into different worlds, then they will be encouraged to pick up a book and push through the hard skill of learning to read. For some children, it comes easy. And I think it's important for us to maybe just have a little caveat there, is that of the 4 children in our home, 3 were able to read quite easily. And even though they started reading at different ages, and vastly different ages, but one of my children really, really struggled. And he only learned to read fluently by the time he was 12. So it's not that that we're discounting that there are some kids who it's really like chewing sand when they learn to read, but we keep plugging at it. We keep on doing the same things that we did when they were preschoolers, but we just up the content a little bit. So whereas you would be reading nursery rhymes, well, you carry on reading poetry. You would have been reading picture books, start introducing chapter books. What would you add in there?
Something I meant to mention at the preschool level, and it's applicable then and in the primary grades and actually even in the high school, is to encourage our children to develop the skill of narrating back what we've learned, what they've learned.
Yeah, definitely. And that can happen naturally and easily. When they're very young, it's when they've run outside and they've seen a butterfly and they come back and they tell you what they've seen. So you just take that natural process of them enjoying telling parents or telling their siblings what they've learned. Sorry, my animals are really, really needy today. Off you go, babe. now I've lost my train of thought. But narration. When they come inside and they tell you something, it's exactly the same thing. That when you have read them a story, that they are called upon to tell it back to you. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the whole story, and you can do it in a way of, as you sit down to read that on that day, you can say, do you remember what we read yesterday? At the end of it, you could prompt them with a little question of, why do you think such and such happened? And you can help them get into the character's head. And all the time, you are actually developing language skills by talking and engaging with one another like that.
Absolutely. And it's a great way to get kids who are slower to write things down or who are battling with that to still formulate language. They can just do it orally, and you can even write it down for them if it's a struggle for a specific child. And I used to find when I got my children to tell me back the stories I'd read to them, I'd get a lot more out of them if I did all the writing, because it was easy then for them to just babble away and share what they loved about the story.
Absolutely.
Leading on from preschool again, where you were doing songs and rhymes with little kids, in the primary grades, it's a great time to start giving them an appreciation for poetry. And for some people, this might sound like a nightmare because, you didn't study literature or something like that. But all you do is get a children's poetry book. And we used to make Fridays a light day where we would do things like that. And we would just read the poem. We didn't analyze it in too much detail. We didn't look for deep hidden meanings. We just read the poems. And most children's books of poetry are actually quite fun. But what's great about poems is that, again, it's rich in interesting vocabulary. It's very concise, so there's no wasted words, and it teaches children things like metaphors and innuendos and tones, and it's just a much more creative form of writing than the usual text that we just read in stories or reference books. So that's something that you can just enjoy doing. And maybe you want to share about poetry and tea days.
Yeah, that was one of our fun things. I think I used to think, oh, my kids are so excited about the poetry, but they actually were excited about the baking and the eating of the nice treats that we got. But either way, even today as young adults, they've still got an appreciation for poetry. It's not that they sit and they read and they ponder poetry, but they have an appreciation for it, particularly my eldest. But we would set aside one afternoon a week, make something together, a really special treat, set up the table, make it look really pretty. I had some of my grandma's little tea set, so it was all very delicate, it was like pinky in the air stuff. And then they would sit in and eat and drink, and I would read poetry, and sometimes I would choose it based on a theme. So if we were busy with American history at the time, we would choose American poems. If we were busy with South African history, we would, do South African poems. We even had a season of doing limericks, which are so fun, especially for the boys. And we even did Roald Dahl's Revolting Rhymes at one stage, because sometimes you just want to engage the kids with a little bit of silliness, and then take them back to the good stuff. But so if we were looking again at purchasable curriculum, what I used and what I loved, and which I have now started to supply because I love it so much, was Susan Wise Bauer's programs. She's got the writing with ease and the writing with skill, and she incorporates into those programs everything that we've been speaking about. So the children, when they are in primary school, they are reading wonderful pieces of text, from anything Beatrix Potter all the way through to sort of more serious material. They're doing their copy work, their narration from that. There's poems, all that sort of thing is encompassed in the books, so that parents can take a look at it, the book connection. What were your favorites primary school language programs?
I think overall, because we tried many different language arts programs over the years. And I think the one that stands out for me the most is Excellence in Writing. The product specifically is their Structure and Style program, which specifically teaches writing skills. For phonics, we used various workbooks and even online free printable books. So, you know, there are so many products out there. There's actually no one best one. And I just say to people, if there's something that you like, try it, it will work. And with English, phonics in particularly, there's so many exceptions to the rules and so many loose ends that if you feel like you haven't taught your children everything, that's quite normal. No phonics program does. So yeah, I think the ones you've recommended sound really great. You're almost tempting me to get one for my youngest. And yeah, and I think that's a thing. In the primary grades, we're just teaching them the nuts and bolts of punctuation and, you know, basic correct sentence construction and those kind of things. We don't have to get too technical. The purpose is to teach them to be able to write and read properly. And I think if you can find real life reasons for them to do that, like getting them to type an email to granny, or getting them to start a business where they've actually got to send emails or whatever, do written things, it makes it so much more meaningful. But we understand it's not always possible. So having a good program is definitely probably your primary tool.
And I think that maybe I must just quickly add a little plug in for parents who whose children are really struggling with the semantics of learning to read, because I know what it's like, having had a child who was consistently measuring himself to his siblings who just seemed to be flying through reading, and it was blood, sweat and tears for him. We chose a program back then, so we're talking about a good 15 years ago, called the Wilson Reading System, which is astronomically expensive, but I needed that to be able to shepherd my child through that. And recently, with the purchase of the Book Connection, I came across the All About Reading and the All About Spelling, and they use exactly the same principle, the multisensory approach, the letter tiles, the games, the reinforcement, and short lessons. I think that that's something that goes across all learning to read types, whether they're easy or whether they are struggling to read. Keep your lessons with your language short, nice 20-minute lessons, and that's what All About Reading offers, and All About Spelling. So if I was homeschooling again, I probably would have started all of my children off on that, but it wasn't around back then. So parents can look up that up as well. So before we talk for 3 hours on the subject, let's take a look at high school. What do you think the emphasis should be in the high school years on language arts?
I think, again, it's getting children to read it alone, because that definitely, as I say, keeps filling that database. But they also need to be able to start producing well thought out essays, things that show that they've got the ability to reason and then express their thoughts clearly in a well-organized essay. And that takes time. And I think that as homeschoolers, we probably should do more of that. I don't think I gave my children a lot of essay assignments. They've coped all right in spite of it, but I think it is something that we need to be diligent about getting them to practice if we want them to improve and do well in that skill.
And again, in real life, teens are always asking the question, why should I do this? And if we can give them the reasons for, you will need to have a CV one day. You may need to apply to university that's going to require an entrance essay. You may have a product that you need to do a business plan for. If we take it back to the relevance to everyday life, generally they're willing to engage on it. The other thing is, I still think that our older children should be read to. I read to my children up until the time they left home. And you can choose some meaty, chewy books at that stage for them. Alas, Babylon, or great expectations, or if you like me, I know you were going to say not everybody's like Wendy, but that was my love and my passion. And if you want to throw in your Shakespeare and your Chaucer, you can do that as well. But as long as you are reading aloud, and it gives you fodder to discuss things as well with your teams. One of the other favorites is Pilgrim's Progress for that age. I mean, you can get it for younger ages as well, but that's a lovely book to chew your way through with your older children. And again, just to continue to expose their ear and their thinking to great thought and good vocabulary, because let's face it, we're in an age where we're using emojis for words on text messages, and the fewer words that they can actually type in a message, the better it is. So our job is to compensate for that.
Yeah, I think we need to always, right from the primary grades, make sure that they do understand the difference between correct formal English and the casual slang and abbreviations that we use in text messages, and never mix the two.
Don't do that. And then just as a wrap up, in terms of programs, or were there anything other that you would suggest for high school children? I know that, excellence in writing goes all the way through, even up to college.
That's what we settled on for the high school years. So there's nothing I would add to that.
Okay, so in the primary grades, Susan Wise-Bauer's Writing with Ease is the program, and in the high school one, it's Writing with Skill. There's a whole lot of other ones, but these were the ones that we kind of settled on, that we know that we can recommend to parents. And then obviously, if they use our 21st Century Footprints program, we've got the language worked into that as well. And that's where your strength came in, having been, studied linguistics at varsity and that sort of thing. So the stuff is out there. And we hope that this is giving parents something to think about as they prepare for their next year. Is there anything else that you would add?
No, just to say that each week for this month, we're going to be focusing on teaching a specific subject and the curriculum products that we recommend to help you with each subject. So keep an eye out for our November videos.
Yeah, great. Lovely. Nice chatting. Thanks, Jill.